Thank you for joining us. We're here on an informal visit on Memorial Day with Mr. Edward Stevens. We salute his service to our country. U.S. Army retired, his service in the 3rd Army, 4th Armored Division under General Patton in World War II. Mr. Stevens?
Yes, ma'am.
At one time, you were as close to General Patton as you and I are right now. What happened?
Following the Battle of the Bulge, we were all in that in some manner. Now, my outfit, which was supply, food and gasoline for General Patton's 3rd Army and that 4th Armored Division, and we followed them all the way across Europe. Well, following the Battle of the Bulge, General Patton wanted to thank all of the troops that helped, especially in the push into Belgium under, I believe it was General, was it Ronstadt? I believe it was, whoever the general was, the German general, who had pushed into Belgium. And we supplied him, and General Patton called all of us together and stood on the back of one of the transports that we used. It was a flatbed that we used to transport disabled tanks. And he's standing up above me with his little bow-legged self and the little pearl-handled pistols. I remember those, and thanked us for a job well done because we pushed the Germans out of Belgium with our machine guns and especially the multiple 50s.
Speaking of Germans, you have artifacts that you brought back that belonged to Germans during World War II. Tell me about those.
Oh, now I have, and then I'll show you in a few minutes, I have a German Luger, which was a German sidearm. It's in good shape now that I brought back. I also brought back a P-38, which is a German sidearm, and the serial number of that is number 6578. It was stolen from me in Newport News, Virginia. I'd like to have it back if the police ever find it. But anyway, I'll show you that too. And along with a camera that I brought back from Germany, that I made a lot of pictures with, and also with the person who supplied me with a lot of film when I was over there, was from the 69th Signal Battalion. And I believe he took pictures and wrote for the Stars and Stripes over there. But he and I were good friends, and he often picked up supplies from me, and we would swap, I'd swap him an extra, maybe a case of peaches for some film or camera, whatever he had, or sometime a picture that he had made for the Stars and Stripes. So we were good friends, and often he would get a little perk if he would bring me some film for my camera.
Speaking of supply, you were responsible for supplying soldiers with a lot of the things they depended on. You held in your hand at one time a German calculator. It was made of iron.
Cast iron. The German calculators were, I could work them faster than I could the American calculators that were supplied to us. In other words, how many number 10 cans of peaches would it take to feed 968 men one meal for one day? And I could tell you in just a matter of seconds by using that little calculator and hitting my decimal point with my finger. So I'd get a lot of fun out of figuring that out. Or whether it's 16-ounce cans, 24-ounce cans of this, because it's a matter in which we were taught to stack food supplies, and as much as we could stack them in of 3 and 5. three and two, which would give you 5, and you could easily count by 5s if you had them out there on dunnage on the supply line. So I got a kick out of it, but I had been to school for that.
Talking about food, it played a huge part in liberation of the concentration camps. You were there. What did you see and what role did this food play?
Oh, I was at the concentration camp there at Buchenwald, which was at the airfield was there at Würzburg, Germany. And once we liberated that camp, the medics had set up tents around the airfield there at Würzburg. And many of those who could still walk were there to try to get I guess their stomachs back to where they could eat solid food. But if we would dump our mess kits, they would grab this, I could almost slop what we had there, dumping out, would eat it, and some of them would fall over and die. And then all the bodies that we had stacked up there, and you see pictures that I brought back that's here, of some of the bodies that were stacked up like that, and it just took my appetite for anything to see that and to have to delouse those who were still living, unload sometime 40 or 50 C-47s as they came into the airfield at Würzburg, take the food out and load these people, refugees from the concentration camp, those who were still alive, to load them on the planes to fly back to either France or England. I don't know where they took them back, someplace. But those who were dead, to find them in the ovens out there at Würzburg, at the concentration camp at Buchenwald, I believe was the name of it. And to see them stacked up like cordwood, it just took my appetite, because man's inhumanity to man just got to me. And for many years, I just refused to even think about it or talk about it. But only in the past, I guess, 8 or 10 years, I've gotten where I could talk about it without almost going to pieces.
Was this the most emotional memory you had of your service in World War II?
It is. That and to see all the bodies that came out when the planes bombed Metz and we were able to get back in the Metz, Germany, the forts there. There was a lot of them killed there at the forts in Metz, and I stood out and looked at them bomb the Germans out of there after. Well, let's go back. Patton and that whole Third Army, the 4th Army Division, went in there and took Metz to start with. But we couldn't keep up with food and gasoline, and as a result, the Germans came back into the forts at Metz and spent the winter there because bad weather set in. We couldn't get in there to bomb them. And once they took over, the Germans couldn't get out, and we couldn't get in. And bad weather set in, we couldn't bomb them. But later on, just at the beginning of spring, I believe it was around 1,200 planes. I looked up, and here they come, when the weather cleared up, and started bombing Metz with the earth shaking. Sunshiny day, and yet the planes, there's so many planes in the air, was a cloud over them, and the earth was shaking like a ship on the water, I guess, and just shaking, and all the bombing, and then to see all those bodies come out of there once we took over. Well, after all of that ended, General Patton called all of us together and stood on the back of his transport that we used to transport disabled tanks, and spoke to us and told us how proud he was of the soldiers that had carried him through all of that combat. And my outfit, the 575th Quartermaster Railhead, was one of them. and I stood as close to him as I am to you almost as he spoke to us, but he's standing up on a transport talking to us. He's a little bow-legged man with his pearl-handled pistols, cussed at just about every other word he said, but we had carried him through, and he told us how proud he was of it.
Mr. Stevens, you're a native of Dora in Walker County in Alabama.
Dora, Alabama.
As a college student, you actually volunteered for the service and were trained in Fort Benning.
Yes, and I guess those of us who studied history and remember history, that there had been rumblings of war, I guess, prior to 1941. But anyway, Congress enacted what they called the Enlisted Reserve Corps, ERC. And as a college student, most of your college students, then the young men, well, the act said something like this, that if a young man would enlist in the reserves, he would be allowed to graduate from college before being called to active duty. And it was a group of us volunteered. I volunteered September the 19th, 1941. Of course, we all know what happened on December the 7th that same year. The Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. Once they did that, all the reserves were called to active duty. And I was called to active duty and sent to Fort Benning, Georgia. And my brochure there will tell you that while at Fort Benning, I got my basic training in what was called intelligence and reconnaissance. In other words, how to work behind enemy lines, map reading, directing fire, and the like. I must have done pretty well, because once I finished basic, I was asked if I would help stay there at Fort Benning and help to train. No, not at Fort Benning. They sent me from Fort Benning to Camp Wheeler, and it was at Camp Wheeler that I took my basic training. And once I finished there, they asked me to stay on and help train the cadre. I stayed for one cycle, and then was sent to Camp Polk, Louisiana. Once at Camp Polk, I was trained in what we called ration breakdown. In other words, how to feed so many troops one meal for one day. And then you had to learn how many cans of this, or the size of can was in a case, and how to stack that case. Then how to break it down for, let's say, here's an outfit that had 938 men. How many number 10 cans of peaches would it take to feed that many men one meal for one day? Well, you had a little calculator that the Americans furnished you. It was kind of made out of tin. But once we got in combat and had to figure that out, the Germans had one made out of cast iron. And if the guns are going off around you and the like, and you hear all of that, that thing bouncing around, the Germans would stay put, and it wouldn't slow me up one bit figuring out whatever it was, the reports that each outfit had. Well, in my outfit, I had, I believe it was 169 men in the 575th Railhead. And we were feeding, I don't know, hundreds of thousands a day, which meant we weren't getting any sleep to mount anything wherever we could. And moving with the 4th Armored Division, that was after we broke through the lines in, at St. Lo, and the other place there outside before we got into Paris. And I can tell you about even that after we broke through the hedgerow fighting. That's when General Patton took over. We were already on the beach when General Patton took over. And Eisenhower had sent for him. We heard later that he sent for him. He was either in Italy or in North Africa. And he sent for him, but we were pinned down because the Germans had us pinned down on the beach, and they were up there in the hedgerows just above us on the hill. And I guess we stayed out there for about a week or two, pinned down with nothing but combat rations. And I like to tell this, where the French and all, the French had lost a lot of hogs, and were hogs running around out there. Well, we had a little gasoline stove and canopy over us, and those balloons over us with cables, so the planes couldn't come in and bomb us. And we shot 2 of the hogs and covered up a place there with those little stoves, and we had to, being in supply, we had plenty of little big pots, and we skinned those hogs and boiled them. We had salt out there, and some of the best tasting meat after combat rations I'd have about 2 weeks. But I like to tell that. But anyway, once Eisenhower had sent for Patton, Patton took over and had them, I don't know what he put on the front of those tanks, but it pushed where the Germans had put machine guns in the hedgerows, pushed those hedgerows down, and we were able to break through there. And all the way from there to Trier and St. Lo and Trier, which opened us up all the way to Paris. Well, we got on the outskirts of Paris, and we got word that not to go into Paris. Said, why? Said that the FFI, which was the Free French of the Interior, wanted to take Paris back for themselves, and that they were going to take Paris instead of the Americans and the English troops going in there, and they told us to stay out. Well, about 4 or 5 of the guys from my outfit said, oh, that's a fine city, they just don't want us in there. And they went in. So I told them, Steve, you going? No. So they told us not to go near Paris. Well, this was in the afternoon, about dusk dark, a little after dark that night. It was 6 who had gone in there. All of a sudden, it lit up. Guns started going off, flares. We could see near the Eiffel Tower. And about 8 or 9 that night, the 4 or 5 that went in there came back out of breath. I think they had run all the way from Paris back to our camp. So, man, they're fighting like hell in there. Well, the FFI had started taking their city back, and they did, and ran the Germans out, captured so many of them, but I didn't go. And finally we swung around and went on around Paris into Orleans. And I remember Orleans because I believe I had read somewhere that that was the birthplace of Joan of Arc. And from then I could tell you all about the trek then, because the 4th Armored Division and the 3rd Army was ready to move then, and we didn't let anything stand in our way. We supplied, and the infantry and the artillery and everything, and those tanks just moved. We captured a lot of the Germans. And what would happen, the Germans, well, we had them on the move. They were retreating, but they were fighting all the way. And the SS seldom surrendered. That was Hitler's special troops, I guess you would call them. But the WOMAC, which was, just, I guess they would volunteer or the conscripted or what, they would hide. And then once the infantry, our infantry, had captured the land and moved on, and we set up to supply them with gasoline and food, here they would come in with their hands above their head hollering, "Kamerad, Kamerad," surrendering. It would make us angry, but we didn't treat them badly. We'd check them, search them. If they had any souvenirs that we thought we wanted, we'd take that. But all of their guns and ammunition they'd thrown away anyway. And we'd call back over the little walkie-talkies we had, send so many trucks, we had so many prisoners. Well, somewhere behind us, they'd send trucks and pick up the prisoner, and we'd go back to issuing rations and gasoline for the tanks. So.
Mr. Stevens, when you left the service after World War II, you resumed your education. Troy State University at that time played a part in your education, and then you received your master's from Alabama State University and became an educator, an award-winning educator.
Yes, I always did like going to school. I graduated ahead of my class in high school. I came back president of my graduating class in college, and I guess an honor student there. I liked it. I always did like studying, and once I did that, my college professor, and I was working on, I've got my bachelor's at Alabama A&M, and my master's at Alabama State University. Well, when I enrolled at Alabama State, I had one professor, Dr. Robert C. Hatch, who was, I guess, my mentor and everything else. He sort of took a liking to me. I guess he saw something in me, I don't know. But I told him, I had gotten married by that time, and told him, I said, I came over here first to go straight through for my master's. I said, but I've got a family on the way now. I can't do that. He said, come on, you're the very person I want. And carried me to his hometown down in Perry County, Alabama, and carried me to the superintendent and said, I got the man for you. And to make a long story short, I was hired there and became principal of the high school. Later named, it was Perry County Training School then, and later named for Dr. Robert C. Hatch High School. And I spent 7 years down there with that group, and I guess I must have done all right because the Montgomery school system asked me to come here as principal. I became principal of McDavid Elementary School, which is now a part of Alabama State University's campus. And from there, they built Houston Hill High School, and the superintendent made me principal up there. Well, I went through Houston Hill as during the whole civil rights movement. And I guess my students, I respected them and they respected me. I can remember the Selma to Montgomery March. I had a delegation to come to me then and told me, Mr. Stephen, said, we don't want to disrespect you, said, but we want to join the march when it gets to Montgomery. What should we do? I said, now, I can't dismiss you from school. I have no authority to dismiss you from school, but I said, I'll tell you what. If you get permission from your parents to march with the marchers, you can join them. I said, sure, you'll be marked absent from school. I said, just don't show up at school and get permission from your parents to go ahead and march. I said, I can't stop you. They said, thank you. So what happened then, the day that they marched into Montgomery, to the Capitol, I think I had, out of an enrollment of almost 1,000 students, I had less than 100 in school that day. So I told my teachers, I said, it's not enough students to conduct too many classes here, so what you do, bring them all to the auditorium. And I got a television set and set it up in the auditorium, and that's where I had the teachers to bring the rest of the students. And we sat up there and watched everything on television that day that Dr. King brought the folks to the Capitol.
Mr. Stevens, this is an informal visit for Memorial Day. Is there anything you want to say to your listeners and your viewers about Memorial Day?
I hope you realize that the listeners and those realize what inhumanity to man can be perpetuated by those who don't follow some type of, whether you call it Christianity or what, but that human life is precious. And there's no need of nations getting out trying to kill somebody over anything. If you want to, I just don't have an answer for it. And yet war has been with us and will always be with us because mankind cannot agree. And over what? When life is gone, it's gone. And we have fought for that. We've given our life for it. And those who believe, I still believe in America, and America can be great again. It always has been. But that we can come together with our thoughts and ideas to make this whole planet Earth a better place in which mankind can live, and to live together in peace. If we have to fight for it, but why kill like we do? I don't understand it.
I want to thank you for your visit today. We salute your service to your country, and we remember those who gave their lives for our country. We've been visiting with Mr. Edward Stevens, U.S. Army retired, who served in World War II in the 3rd Army, 4th Armored Division under General Patton.